For this video, we're going to be talking about Aeschylus's play Seven Against Thebes. Now, in the introduction to this edition, and this is the Oxford Complete Aeschylus Volume 2 edition, the editors start by writing, with some important exceptions, scholars and translators from the 19th century onward have been virtually at one in their indifference to Seven Against Thebes, an indifference that has been deflected from time to time only into overt hostility and contempt. The play has been accused of being static, undramatic, ritualistic, guilty of an interpolated and debased text, archaic, and in a word, boring. Now, Seven Against Thebes is not the most exciting of Greek drama that survives. I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say it's boring. There are parts of it that are boring. Part of the thing I think that Seven Against that sort of works against Seven Against Thebes is that, unlike with a lot of other Greek tragedy where we don't have a ton of other plays on that subject matter, we have a lot of plays about the Theban cycle, the cursed house of Laius. Sophocles' Theban cycle of Oedipus the king, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone being the most famous example. But we have other versions of the Seven Against Thebes. Euripides has a version of it that survives. And so there are a lot of other plays about the same broad subject matter, and they tend to move a lot quicker, and they tend to be a lot more exciting than the Aeschylus version. That being said, the Aeschylus version is interesting in its own ways. One of the ways in which it's interesting is its gender politics, which are very problematic and very Oedipal. So there's a couple of different things I want to address in terms of gender politics, and I'll start by talking about the Oedipal component, because one of the things that we get throughout the play is a rhetoric referring to Thebes in maternal imagery, Thebes as the motherland. And the conflict... So actually, I'll sort of back up just a second and give you a very broad overview of what Seven Against Thebes is about. So basically, after Oedipus has discovered that he has inadvertently killed his father and married his mother, blinds himself, and hits the road, the throne descends to his sons, Polynices and Eteocles. In order to try and be fair about the rule of Thebes and this divided patrimony, the sons agree that Polynices will rule for 1 year, and then Eteocles will rule the next year, and then they'll switch back and forth. Polynices rules for his 1 year, and then he goes. Eteocles assumes the throne, and at the end of his 1 year, he kind of says, you know what? I don't really want to give up being king, so I'm going to stay. Polynices goes to Argos, raises an army to conquer Thebes, and he returns. This is where the Seven Against Thebes picks up. Basically, the Argive army is at the gates. There's 7 gates of Thebes, and the Argives have chosen 7 champions, 7 leaders who are going to lead the attacks on each of the gates. And so Eteocles chooses 7 fitting defenders, 7 people who are specifically chosen because their sort of virtues or attributes or the designs on their shield, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit, are in some way counter to the Argive champion who's going to be attacking that gate. So that's the first 3/5 of the play or so. Then, after the battle, we have a choral interlude, and then after the battle, a messenger comes in, announces that Eteocles and Polynices have killed one another. There's a long lamentation scene where the chorus is lamenting the deaths of these two leaders. And then the play ends with basically a messenger from the Argot, or the Theban council, coming in and saying, Eteocles getting buried, state funeral, all the honors, pomp and ceremony, free booze for everyone. They don't say free booze for everyone, but that's the gist of it. Polynices, on the other hand, out, dead body being eaten by dogs. Antigone stands up and says, I will bury my brother, don't care what you say. And this, of course, sets the stage for what happens in Sophocles' Antigone, that sort of next stage of the myth structure. So, that's the Seven Against Thebes. Gender politics, really problematic here. So one of the things we have is, again, this continual sort of rhetoric of Thebes as motherland, or Thebes as mother. So early in the play, Eteocles, in his opening speech, actually says, so the honor of this mothering land may not be extinguished, either for her children whom she brought forth and cherished, or for herself, their parent and devoted nurse. Then later on, in reporting, so the scout who goes through and describes all of the champions and what device is on their shield, is describing Amphiaraos, who's a priest of Apollo, and he's sort of seen the future because Apollo tells you the future. And in Amphiaraos' speech that the scout recounts, he's even more explicit about this Oedipal component. He says, how can your land mother, wife to your father, or how can your motherland, wife to your father, ravaged by your lust and looming spear, accept and espouse you? So this is his critique to Polynices. Little bit unclear why Amphiaraos is so critical of the side that he's fighting on, but we're getting that speech secondhand. But again, we've got this, how can your motherland, wife to your father, ravaged by your lust and looming spear, accept and espouse you? I mean, without saying you're gonna fuck Thebes, who's your mom, it's hard to get that much more explicit about the Oedipal component of this. I mean, Thebes here becomes the motherland that each son, that each brother, Eteocles and Polynices, is attempting to possess, in both the sort of literal sense of land property ownership and in the biblical sense. And this, of course, is very significant because Oedipus, their father, is obviously quite famous for having killed his father and married his mother, which was the source of all his troubles. So we've got that repetition, but we've also got another element here, another really serious component of misogyny from Eteocles. The women who make up the chorus spend a good portion of the opening of the play basically fearfully anticipating their fate and asking the gods to protect Thebes and to protect them. And Eteocles comes on and he says to them, as they're praying to the gods whose shrines are set up on stage, he says, you animals, repulsive beasts, I ask you, is this screaming and bawling, this hysterical prostration before the shrines any way to save our city, or to encourage defending troops. To sane men in command of themselves, this is an outrage. Neither in disaster nor in the careless calm of life may I ever get cornered and quartered with any female. So again, he's asking not to ever get married or sexually entangled with a woman, apparently apart from Thebes, his symbolic mother. When a woman is confident, her insolence can't be endured. When frightened, she's even worse, a danger to house and to city. At this moment, with your storming sea noise and your skittering about, you have drained our souls and paralyzed our citizens, assisting the tides that threaten our walls. Thus are we being sacked from within. This is what comes from sharing life with women. And if command is violated by anyone, man, woman, any who joins with... we'll leave it there. Aeschylus comes on with this really, really misogynistic speech, claiming that these women, because they are fearful and because they're praying to the gods for deliverance, that they're sapping the manly strength from the Theban soldiers and all this stuff. And he starts by calling them, you animals, repulsive beasts. I mean, this is a super anti-feminist rant. I mean, Greek drama is not really known for its equitable gender parody, but this is a really egregious example. And actually, it's weird because this edition came out in 2009, and so the editors should have a better sense of this, but the editors even get in a little bit on this sort of anti-woman, anti-feminist kind of rant, because when they're talking about the Fury, this sort of avenging demon beast, who in Greek mythology defends the helpless with extreme violence in many cases. The editors here have written, her contradictoriness is the contradictoriness of woman. The tender mother ready to kill in defense of those she cherishes. I mean, seriously. Her contradictoriness is the contradictoriness of woman. That's what you're going with in 2009? I mean, I know that Classics is a discipline that is not exactly regarded as progressive, although there's a number of up-and-coming classicists, newly emerging classicists who are working to change that. But seriously, did you have to be that overtly anti-feminist? So anyway, those are the problematic gender issues, and I want to talk about a couple of other things here. One of the things I do want to come back to is this issue of Aeschylus choosing the champion to face the Argive champions based on their shields, based on the characteristics of that champion. Now, this is a long bit in the play. This is probably almost a third of the play, where the scout is describing the Argive champion, describing what's on the shield and what it symbolizes. And then Aeschylus basically responds. He analyzes that person, he analyzes the symbolism, etc., and he chooses his own champion based on who's going to be a fitting counterpart. It's a lengthy thing, and I'm sure actually to see it performed, it's really not that interesting, because it takes a long time, and not that much necessarily happens. But it's actually a really interesting section if you take it as sort of description not only of Greek mythology and the symbolism of different deities, different mythical figures, like Ares, Zeus, Artemis, Athena, Apollo, Typhon, the Sphinx, etc., It's actually really interesting because you get a sense of who these characters are in mythology, but you also get a sense of the way that the Greeks thought about them, the way that they thought about how the gods interacted with them, how the gods sort of fit into their lives. So that's a really interesting bit. It's not dramatically interesting, but it's mythologically interesting. And then the last thing I want to talk about, just very briefly, is this passage from the chorus, very late, or fairly late in the play, as Eteocles, actually at the end basically of the section where Eteocles is assigning champions, because he chooses himself to go fight Polynices, and the chorus very presciently says, that's not a good idea. And what they say to him is, oh, but of this consanguinity of two men who share the same blood, the death of one by the hand of the other, who is the image of himself, such blood spills pollution which endures and fouls beyond cleansing. So this is really significant because even though Thebes wins this battle, they defeat the Argives, not only do we have the sort of the problems of Sophocles' Antigone, where the city refuses to bury Polynices, and then Antigone buries him anyway, and she gets killed, and Haman gets killed, etc., etc. Also, later on, like 10 years after this, there's a group called the Epigoni, who are the children of the Argive, the sons of the Argive captains who are defeated in this battle. They actually come and they sack Thebes. So this notion that the descendants of Laius, so Laius, Oedipus, and then Eteocles and Polynices, they continue doing the wrong thing and they continue calling down the wrath of the gods, and that has these long-term repercussions. This is really central to the Greek tragic worldview.